Hello everyone and welcome again to Minimalist Gourmet, where today I'll be teaching you how to make the American classic comfort food pot roast with vegetables. So let's go ahead and get started. And of course, let's get started with the beef. I'm using rump steak here. However, you can use anything like chuck, round, or brisket. The more connective tissue that it has, the better it's actually going to cook up in this low and slow process. So go ahead and pick something that has quite a lot of connective tissue and a bit of fat. The cheaper, the better. Now we're going to go and start by covering this in a bit of oil on all sides. You want to rub this in really well and make sure all the surfaces are coated, including the other side. So go ahead and get every surface. We're also going to go ahead and very generously sprinkle salt on all of the surfaces as well, but only salt at this point because we're going to add all the rest of our seasonings at a later time. Make sure to get both sides here. Since it's a big piece of meat, we want to make sure it gets seasoned well. For this next step, I have preheated this pot over medium-high heat. We're going to place our oiled up piece of beef into the pan so that it can sear off on this first side. Now by browning the meat before we slow cook it, we're going to bring a lot of extra flavor to the dish. Once it is cooked for a few minutes on this first side and become nice and brown, we're going to go ahead and give it a flip and allow it to brown on the second side. Once you've browned all the sides of your piece of meat, we're going to go ahead and pull that off and just sit it on a plate and allow it to relax while we get the rest of the dish ready. I deglazed the bottom of my pot with about a quarter cup of water. And now I'm adding a half of a chopped onion in rings to the bottom. Now this is going to do two things. One, it's going to add flavor from the onions, as well as create a nice base so we can rest a piece of meat atop. By elevating the piece of meat on the onions, this allows all of our seasonings and our jus to get underneath that piece of meat and evenly season it and cook it from all sides. We're going to follow this up with 2 cups of quality beef stock, followed by around 6 to 7 cloves of garlic. If that sounds like a lot, don't worry, the flavors will mute themselves in this low and slow cooking process. You also don't need to chop them up and mince them really fine. Larger chunks will work perfectly fine in this application. Now let's talk about the vegetation. I'll be using some carrots and potatoes. You can use these. You can also additionally add something like squash, parsnips, sweet potatoes. Anything that's a bit hardier will work really nicely. The important part here is that you don't want to cut the pieces too small. You want to cut them into nice, generous sized pieces, as you can see I'm doing here. That way they'll hold up well during the long cooking process. If you're using something like potatoes, as I am here, you're not going to want to cut them small either. All I'm going to do is cut these potatoes in half and then cut each of those halves into quarters, and that's it. This is the size that you're looking for right here. Go ahead and put them right in the pot and we can move on. To thicken up our beef broth, we're going to add a slurry. This is 3/4 of a cup cool drinking water mixed with 4 tablespoons of cornstarch. Go ahead and just distribute that evenly over the pot roast so that it can mix well with our beef broth. This will thicken up nicely into a gravy as we cook. Let's season everything up with a nice generous pinch of salt, some extra granulated garlic, some ground black pepper, and a bit of paprika. To this, we're also going to add a nice healthy pinch of dried herbs, and then make sure to give everything a nice mix before we go ahead and put this in to cook. I also like to make sure that that broth is completely mixed with that slurry here so that it'll thicken up nicely as we cook. Cover and place into a 325-degree oven for 2.5 hours. If you don't have an oven, you can absolutely do this on your range. Just go ahead and cover it, cook on its lowest setting for 2.5 hours. And with some editing magic, we are 2.5 hours in the future. Let's check on the doneness of our vegetables and meat. You can just simply take a fork and press it into the carrots and potatoes to make sure that they're done. They should yield very nicely but not be mushy. And the same thing for the meat. Once you stick your fork in, it should be nice and tender and fall apart relatively easy. However, if for some reason your vegetables or your beef aren't completely done to your liking, go ahead and put them back in the oven or cook them for an additional 30 to 60 minutes. You can slice your beef into medallions or use 2 forks to shred it as I'm doing. I really prefer the shredded beef as this reminds me of that rustic homestyle meat that we had growing up. And that's it, you are ready to eat. All you have left to do now is serve. The best part of this being a one-pot dish is you have your vegetables, you have your starch, you have your protein, and you have your sauce. Everything is right here, ready to go. Go ahead and give a nice generous portion of those vegetables, followed by a nice generous portion of that beef. And oh yeah, don't forget that amazing gravy that we have. That's right guys, it is just that easy to make this delicious dish at home tonight. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all again here real soon on another episode of Minimalist Gourmet.